No? Good evening. I'd like to call this regular business meeting to order, and thank you for your patience. I'd like to ask the treasurer to call the roll.
President Baker.
Present.
Mr. Brown. Vice President McClure.
Here.
Ms. Gibbs.
Here.
Ms. Hudson. Ms. Reyes.
Here.
Mr. Stewart.
You have a quorum, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. And I'd like to ask Director Johnson to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, if she doesn't mind. Please be upstanding. Thank you. And before we begin, if there's no objection from my colleagues, I'd like to read a statement related to recent acts of violence in Pittsburgh and Louisville and other places. So much of our collective attention recently has been on yesterday's election, and rightfully so, given the outcomes both here in Ohio and across the nation. But in the process, it seems as though the country has moved on from yet another senseless national tragedy, one that reminded us that the fight for hope and compassion over hate and bigotry is regrettably far from over. On the Saturday just 2 weekends ago, 11 people were killed and more were wounded when a gunman opened fire inside the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. In the moments and days after, in what has become commonplace, there were lots of thoughts and prayers shared, which is great, but thoughts and prayers are not enough. I believe that the freedom to live and worship without fear, much like the right to attend public schools and receive a quality education, is an essential American truth. As public school advocate Dan Rather said recently after visiting the elementary school he had first stepped foot in 80 years earlier, our classrooms can serve, must serve as incubators for our common decency, for our sense of fairness, for our bonds of citizenship, and for the foundation of a more just nation. In our national political dialogue in recent years, consideration and compromise have all too often been replaced by contempt and vitriol. Decisions at the highest levels of our government increasingly seem to be made not in the best interests of every citizen, but for the benefit of the few. We continue to have residents in our city and throughout our country fearful of deportation or losing legal protections or simply becoming the victims of political retribution. And prejudices that we thought had been overcome over race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and all of the diversities that make us stronger have instead been allowed to leach back into political discussions and tarnish all that's been accomplished in our fights for civil rights. Yes, the challenges are many, but I am hopeful because I know that as a community and as a nation, we can do better because we have done better. Our history has shown that when we come together to face even the toughest of our challenges head on, there's very little that we cannot overcome. As former President Obama said, all of us have to fight the rise of anti-Semitism and the rise of hateful rhetoric against those who may look, love, or worship differently than us. And we have to stop making it so easy for those who want to harm the innocent to get their hands on a gun. And the last thing we should advocate is arming our synagogues, our churches, our schools, our college campuses, and other places where people go to feel safe. Words matter, so do actions. I would like to once again call on all elected officials and community leaders everywhere to stand up to hatred and to engage with one another in pursuit of tolerance and real solutions. The virtues of tolerance and diversity were threatened that day in Pittsburgh, Louisville, about the same time, just as they were in Charlottesville, Charleston, and every place where unchecked racial and religious intolerance is being allowed or even encouraged to escalate into violence. Hatred is based in fear. Fear is based in ignorance. Another reason why education is so critically important. Love is still the strongest force in the world. So I would ask that we take a moment of silence to honor those directly affected by the tragedy at Tree of Life, but also to recommit ourselves to standing up against hate in all its forms, to embracing diversity, and to say as a school district and as a nation, we truly are safer together. Let's observe a moment of silence. I thank you very much for that indulgence. Mr. Treasurer, please note the arrival of Board Member Hudson. And let me briefly read through the agenda we have before us. We will hear from public speakers. We have 10, which is the limit. After we hear from them, we'll hear from our superintendent, we'll hear from our treasurer, we'll hear from our general auditor. We will then take up our consent agenda, after which we will hear announcements. We will, at some point, also hear from our facilities task force. We'll do that actually under the superintendent's report. We will then have a work session around those recommendations. We will then recess into executive session. We will likely come back from executive session with additional board activity. So having said that, is there a motion that we adopt the agenda with the correction of hearing from the task force during the superintendent's report?
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs? Yes. Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. We will now take public comment. I want to thank those of you who have taken the time to be here this evening to address the Board of Education. Each one of you will receive 4 minutes to speak. You'll see on the screen a timer. We would ask that you do conclude at the end of your 4 minutes because there are 10, and that gives us 40 minutes of public testimony. So I'll ask you to come up to the podium by name. I'll state your topic and the board action that you request, and then you'll have your 4 minutes. Again, thank you for being here this evening. First speaker, Michael Burton. Topic, school closing. Board action requested. Hear comments from CCS in reference to Mifflin Middle School. Mr. Burton, good evening.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Report, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, interim superintendent.
Speak into the microphone.
I can speak louder.
Yes, thank you.
On behalf of Pastor David C. Forbes and the Columbus Christian Center Church, I thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of Mifflin Alternative Middle School. The board is aware that Mifflin Middle School is part of a grade band proposal you seek to preserve. Cassidy Elementary School, Mifflin Alternative Middle School, and Mifflin High School. Closing Mifflin is counterproductive to your own stated goal of maintaining grade band schools. In this room today, there are several members from Columbus Christian Center, and we have a congregation of over 1,100 persons who cannot be here today because the room is so small. But the point is, there is a small contingency here. Most of them have on, if you'll see them, they have on a line t-shirt like this one, spirit, soul, and body aligned. And so we're here to represent Pastor Forbes and our connection to the 43219 zip code area, which is part of the vision for Columbus Christian Center. Mifflin Middle School was originally Mifflin High School. If I'm incorrect, please feel free to correct me at any time. And therefore has more square footage than most typical middle schools. If it is considered an underutilized facility, which I have heard some comments regarding that from the Facilities Committee, does that square footage consider areas that children are not instructed within? That's a question I think that the general public needs to know. Because if you're including that square footage, there's a lot of area in that school that is not instructional area. So when it comes to the amount of square footage per pupil, obviously there would be some skewing of the number there. Mobility rate roughly is about 50% in and out of Mifflin Middle School. Therefore, attendance is stable or increasing, and that's even according to your data that you've done on your population census for the Columbus City Schools in terms of attendance for the city schools maintaining and being very steady for the next few years. So given that information, 2014 through 2017, attendance has increased at Mifflin Middle School by 5%. Current enrollment right now is 479 students. The current 7th grade is over capacity and in need of an additional instructor. So when we're talking about square footage per student, talking about an enrollment that is actually increasing, not decreasing, if anything, staying steady, the school has the space to accommodate what it needs. And I know that the Facilities Committee had a challenge with that space number. Facility repairs, Medina and Mifflin Middle are both in need of repairs and air conditioning. Building a new facility or refurbishing Mifflin Middle School should be the priority as far as I'm looking at it, because I know we're not here to talk about funding, but I do believe that we're talking about increasing the educational capacity of the children. Recommendations to move on, there's a whole lot more I can go into in terms of how well the school has done with its grade, comparing this school, Medina, to Mifflin. Medina technically is an F school. Mifflin Middle is a D school. It's now a C school, I correct that. It's a C school. It has made considerable progress, and there will be people coming up in a few moments to talk about the community involvement. So my last comment is this. If we're looking at Mifflin, which is now a focus school, not a priority school, in 2014, Mifflin had roughly about 2,000 or so out-of-school suspensions. Now that number has dropped 31% because of Principal Colson and the work she's doing, mainstreaming ESL students, maintaining academic integrity, and the school is starting to flourish. So my last comment is this, last comment here. The community support that we're asking you guys to help us with, because there is so much community support that has been galvanized to support Mifflin. And my goal is that that support will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Are there any clarifying questions from my colleagues? Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Laurie Blair. Topic, Lyndon McKinley. Board action requested. Consider the positive aspects of Lyndon McKinley. Ms. Blair, good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bahouric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Sanford. My name is Laurie Blair. I'm a proud teacher of Columbus City Schools. I'm currently on special assignment at Lyndon McKinley. I'm here today to illustrate to you that we have risen and we will continue to rise, as we rise together at LMSA. My high school teacher ended a graduation speech by saying, you have to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how is it going to come true? In 2011, I was hired at Lyndon, and our graduation rate was at 38%. We had a dream. Fast forward 7 years later, and I am proud to share that our dream was a reality. It wasn't without determination and grit, though. We, the Lyndon community and school, we rose through the data scandal and the drive-by shooting on our campus in the fall of 2016. We reverse evacuated that day. Children and adults were covered in blood. They fled back to the safety of the school. One of our teachers saved the lives of a young man. Vice President Cole, you stood with us the next morning. We made a list of supports that would be implemented as early as the next day, and some over the weeks and months to come. The board and senior leadership invested in our dream. Beyond time, financial commitments were added with extra administrators, additional safety and security, and an additional SRO when available. Several key partnerships were afforded to us. Children's Hospital, City Year, communities and schools, all who are still with us today. However, some partnerships came into support but have been phased out. Patel for Kids, Metro, and the ESC of Franklin County. One support that was needed at the time but seems very detrimental in this moment, our enrollment was frozen, allowing us time to heal. Despite challenges, our Panthers have roared. First in matriculation and retention, our 7th, 8th, and 9th grade students matriculation percentages have increased over the last 2 years. We currently have our largest 7th grade class at 136. A steady climb in American government air test results. In 2016, 20% of our students were proficient. In 2018, 50% of our students scored proficient. That dramatic increase is a direct reflection of teacher efficacy and shared leadership. Our greatest accomplishment was a 91% graduation rate last year. I was hired as the graduation coach in 2011. I have worked with 18 assistant principals and LIs and 3 head principals. Through that instability, we rose to 91%. Our agricultural credential pathway and NCCER senior-only option, new this year, will ensure our graduation rate continues to rise. After securing a leadership team, we have been able to cultivate new programming. In the spring of 2017, we partnered with Doris Corda. Our students are using an innovative method to solve community problems, such as living in a food desert and infant mortality rates. The Columbus Crew SC invested not only in starting a soccer program, but partnering with Accurate to redesign our STEM labs. The district made a financial commitment with Shermont Fox to partner with us to implement a restorative blueprint this year. To close, we have an upward trend in attendance, state test scores, and graduation rate, despite hurdles out of our control. The board's investment over the last 3 years has proven fruitful. We support our students and our community. Given the opportunity to continue our work, we will foster a relationship with our 4 feeder elementary schools. And we know Lyndon McKinley, Lyndon the community, and the city of Columbus will restore and we will rise together. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions? Any clarifying questions from my colleagues? Ms. Blair, thank you. Next speaker is Stephen Cudney. Topic, Lyndon McKinley. Board action requested, consider the positive aspects of Lyndon McKinley. Mr. Cudney, good evening.
Good evening. President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohoric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. My name is Stephen Cudney, and I am the Social Studies Department Chair at Lyndon McKinley, where I also teach American government and African American studies. We are here today to discuss the viability of maintaining Lyndon as a high school in a context of restoration, not only for the city of Columbus, but also Mayor Ginther's plan for the Lyndon community and CCS as well. Restoration is a process. It involves assessment, having the right tools, and the right people to skillfully use them. And ultimately, one must count the costs. I did this when I restored old wood floors in my home, a long and arduous process. How poignant that CCS is feeling the same about its students and the communities they live in. Yet, unknown to most, we have already begun implementing restorative practice in our building setting to launch Phase 1 on Monday, November 12th. It's why in this current restorative climate, we are so perplexed that Linden is even part of the closure conversation. It's being suggested that our students will attend East High School, a building that is at 51% capacity, with 48% of its students coming from outside the catchment. East actually serves no true community. The residents who now reside in its restored catchment more often than not do not send their children there. Linden, on the other hand, is at 76% capacity. Mind you, 75% capacity is the average for the district, with only 21% of our students coming from outside the catchment. Linden does serve its community, and much has already been invested in that regard, as Laurie has listed. But the key to success is in sustaining those investments to not only realize the long-range benefits of the restorative process, but fiscally we are being responsible to our taxpayers. We serve a population of students where many live with generational poverty and the inherent trauma that comes with it. IIRP's Keith Hickman shared with the district last week that restoration is never a matter of simple policy, but one of repairing the climate, culture, and practice of a community. We at Linden have developed our own custom blueprint for restorative practice, making us the only high school in the state of Ohio to have done so. The bottom line is this: our students will need restorative supports wherever they are placed, but it will require a reset, if not at Linden, not an efficient or responsible use of resources, in our opinion. Real change never starts at the top. It's always organically begun by a few pioneers who, as Laurie mentioned, dare to dream. Our staff support is extraordinarily positive, and we understand the needs of our community intimately, enabling us to begin our strategic blueprint with Shermont Fox, our restorative practice consultant brought to us by the district. We see our plan ultimately encompassing our entire feeder pattern, uniquely the only one in the city of Columbus that puts our students within walking distance of our high school. We are forever grateful for the training opportunities received at Reimagine Me and for the support of additional coaching to help us tap the professional expertise already in our building as we seek to fulfill the restorative practice vision cast before us. It is with great excitement we extend an invitation to each of you to visit our building on Friday, November 16th, to witness our humble beginnings and to come alongside us as we walk out our process to restore Linden McKinley, the Linden community, and the city of Columbus. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any clarifying questions? Thank you, Mr. Cudney. Our next speaker, the Reverend Dr. C Dexter Wise III. Topic, Mifflin Middle School. Board action requested, maintain the school by keeping it open. Pastor, good evening.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohoric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to come and to share with you our thoughts about the possible closing of Mifflin Middle School. Our Church Faith Ministries has had a partnership with Mifflin Middle School for many years, and it took a special turn, if you will, when last year we got a 4-year grant to do an after-school program with the students of Mifflin Middle School, many of them who are at risk. And we're in our second year. We have 50 students that come from that school to our church 4 days a week, and they are given academic support, career development, and so forth. In fact, already this year we've taken a busload of them to Wright State, and we will do this throughout the year. One of the things that I think and that I'm hearing, that's a combination between Linden and Mifflin, is especially in Mifflin Middle School, I want you to think about the significance of the word middle. significance of middle, because it is in the middle of so much. And when you take it out of the middle of what it's in the middle of, it destroys what's on both sides of it. It is in the middle of a stream from Cassidy to Mifflin High School. It is in the middle of our community. It is in the middle of partnerships between businesses and sororities and churches and so forth, not to mention neighbors, and in walking distance to many schools. I thought about something today as I was coming here. One of my colleagues years ago told me that his parents had died, both of them had died, and this he said to me after his last parent died. He said it was like a tree, a big tree in the yard that has suddenly been cut down. I said, what's the matter with that? And he said that it's like a tree, an old tree, is actually an ecosystem. And when you cut down a tree, you're doing more than cutting down the tree. You're cutting down the place where the birds who've made their nests live. You're cutting down the place where the grass and all the other little insects and animals have made their home around it. You're cutting down the anchorage of the roots that keep the ground together. And then the big thing that got me, he said, is when his father passed, he missed the shade. The shade that the tree provided him gave him a refuge, gave him a space, gave him a sense of security. And what I'm suggesting to you today is something that you already know, that schools are more than buildings. They are like trees. And when you remove the tree, you not only remove the shade from the sun, you create a hole in the ground. And that hole that you create in the ground is a hole that can be quickly filled in with things that are not growing. And Mifflin Middle School is a tree. It is an old tree, granted, but it's a living tree. It's a growing tree. And the answer is not to cut down the tree. If necessary, prune the tree, fix the tree, spruce up the tree. But don't cut it down and don't transplant it, because even in the process of transplanting it, you may risk the life that it had in the place that it was. So just as my friend suggested, we're not just talking about buildings, we're talking about trees. And in these trees live children, and in these trees live communities. And when you take out what's in the middle, you jeopardize what's on both ends. Thank you.
Thank you. You had to bring the basket? Are there any clarifying questions? Okay. Thank you, Pastor. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. Our next speaker, Cleophas Dulaney. Topic: tax dollars paying for illegal immigrants to attend school. Board action requested. Look into the policy of affording that to happen. Mr. Dulaney, are you here with us this evening? All right, not seeing Mr. Dulaney. He may be in the overflow room. We'll give him a minute. He may not be with us this evening. We'll move on. Our next speaker is Cassandra Freeland. Topic: building conditions at cause. Board action requested. Do something about the building at cause. Ms. Freeland, good evening.
Good evening. President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohoric, Internal Auditor Smith, Superintendent Stanford, board members. My name is Cassandra Freeland, and I'm the parent of 2 students at Columbus Alternative High School. This is my 12th year as a parent in the district, and I worked in the district for 5 of those years. I'm not here tonight to request a specific board action, but to talk to you about the building conditions at cause, and to point out that the facilities proposal under consideration would put middle school students in a building the district spent $38 million to remodel for high school programming. Meanwhile, the 800 high school students, along with the staff at cause, remain in a building designed for elementary students. It's a building with serious climate control issues. Our principal fainted due to the heat, as did at least 1 student. When it's cold, some rooms are cold and others are hot. When it's hot outside, the air in the building is stagnant. It's a building that has an ongoing problem with mice and roaches. It's a building with a combination of pint-sized bathrooms and bathroom doors that won't shut. It's a building with narrow, crowded hallways and mismatched lockers, some of which are knee-high. It's a building where there's no space for the whole school to gather for programs or assemblies. It's a building where visitors do not arrive at the office when entering, which is a problem from a security standpoint. It's a building without options for students with disabilities or injuries that limit their mobility. They have no way to get upstairs. It's a building that's had electrical issues on 3 occasions this year, including evacuating the building and canceling our school play last year, and rescheduling our open house for a second time in the fall due to electrical issues. Our community is at a disadvantage when it comes to advocating for our program. No one knows they'll go there by address. Unlike the other lottery high schools, there's no group of families moving up together. Families may hope their student will go to cause, but they won't know until spring of the 8th grade year at the earliest. Families are there for 4 or 6 years. During my time as a parent in the district, cause is on its 4th principal. The district is on its 3rd, maybe soon to be 4th superintendent. And those changes are a natural part of life in an urban school district. But the result of all these factors is that our students and our staff remain in a building that's not safe from a health perspective, not safe from a security perspective, and not educationally appropriate for high school students. The district does not miss an opportunity to hold up cause for its academic achievements in its U.S. News & World Report ranking, but it's housed in one of the worst facilities in the district. Recently, we had a meeting about the building with district officials. Dr. Stanford explained that the process before the board is about making the most of the buildings the district has in terms of condition and enrollment from both educational and financial perspectives. It's not about capital improvements. District representatives pledged to look into pest control and go back and see where cause projects were in the Operation Fix-It schedule. It was stated at the meeting that influential cause alumni are opposed to moving the building from its current site. That's fine to say, but I don't think they're reporting to work there or sending students there every day. A number of staff attended the meeting as well. One of them, Ms. Claiborne, spoke passionately about how proud she is of cause. She's worked there for 11 years, and she brags about the school's success any chance she gets. But she also notes that they achieved that success with duct tape and a chalkboard. Duct tape and a chalkboard, that's what she said. I'd also like to share with you that my family had the chance to visit briefly with U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown in September. I thanked him for his efforts in the area of school building infrastructure and told him that my sons go to cause, which he visited last year when introducing his School Building Infrastructure Act. I'd like to tell you what he said to me. He told me unsolicited, in a very quiet and sincere and gravelly voice, that place was almost embarrassing. It is embarrassing, and I'm asking you to do something about it, to make a plan to commit to providing an educationally appropriate building for the staff and students at cause.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions for Ms. Freeland, colleagues?
Thank you.
Thank you for being here this evening. Our next speaker is Julie Hughes. Topic, situation at cause, board action requested. Find an interim location for cause. Ms. Hughes, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohoric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. My name is Julie Hughes, and I'm a Columbus Alternative High School parent. I am here tonight to ask the school board to move the cause program to a new high school facility as part of the facilities task force changes. If Linden, McKinley, and East are combined, I think the most feasible option would be to move the cause program into one of those open buildings, even if only on an interim basis, until a new building is constructed for cause. We are a small lottery school without a tightly knit local community, so our voices may not be as vociferous as some. We feel like an underdog in this discussion since, being outside traditional feeder pathways, our building was not even considered in the facilities plan. Therefore, in response to the task force's call for community feedback, I created an online survey to gather opinions from as many cause stakeholders as possible. The survey was live for only 11 days, during which time it was answered by 114 members of the cause community. This total includes 58 parents, 34 students, and 15 to appreciate how many people took the time to complete this survey and to write thoughtful comments. As a means of comparison, the Facility Task Force survey, which was on the Columbus City Schools website for many weeks and covered the entire school district, generated only 60 responses. When it was explained in the survey that money for renovations or new building construction would not be available for at least 4 to 6 years, a full 85% proposed that cause should move to an existing building on either a permanent or an interim basis, rather than staying in the current building while waiting. When asked if moving to a building with more capacity meant increasing enrollment in the program, 80% said that would be all right. This includes 80% of the faculty. Dr. Stanford, Principal Sanders, and all members of the school board and of the facilities task force received the results and comments from this survey. This issue is so vital because students at cause do not feel safe in their school building. It is a gut reaction that hangs over them every day, and it is influencing their future lives. Here's what is happening. Stellar students are looking into attending different schools or telling others not to go to cause because of the building conditions. Students are not eating lunch at school due to vermin in the cafeteria. Students are not using the bathroom at school because of the cramped stalls. High-performing students who love to learn are coming home crying and saying they hate their school because it is so hot it feels like an oven. And here are some of their voices. The district doesn't care about us, only about our test scores and rankings. The flickering lights remind me of when the Demogorgon appears in Stranger Things. Maybe we need to fail more so the district will care about us. There is nothing romantic about students succeeding while struggling to overcome obstacles of neglect put in their path. That is a dangerous myth, or the plot of an after-school TV special. An opportunity is presenting itself right here and right now that would provide an immediate solution, but only if the school board is wise enough and caring enough to make that choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes. Any clarifying questions from my colleagues? Thank you very much for being here. Our next speaker is Ms. T. Street. Topic, Facilities Task Force Recommendations, Board Action Requested. Listen to my comments and my proposal. Good evening, Ms. Street.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohoric, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. I'm here to share my thoughts and opinions with you regarding the Facilities Task Force recommendations for school closures and consolidations. I want to acknowledge that although I serve as the Education Director for the Health Sciences Academies, my opinions are my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of The Ohio State University or Partners Achieving Community Transformation, nor do I speak on behalf of either entity. I am representing myself as a private citizen, parent of the district, community leader, and former resident of the Near East Side. First, I want to acknowledge that I understand the efficacy of school closings and consolidations in general to meet the fiscal needs of our district. I understand streamlining resources to assure the best use of space and to afford the district to receive compensation for some of its assets. I understand that though tough times require tough decisions, and this is a tough time for our district. However, I want to assert that tough decisions should also be well thought out decisions. I am of the opinion that some of the recommendations put forth in the proposed plan by the Facilities Task Force don't reflect a true understanding of the academic or cultural realities of many of our schools. I don't believe elements of the plan represent the best interests of some of the children and families of Columbus City Schools. That is why I felt the need to share my concerns and thoughts with the body that is elected to represent our best interests. First and foremost, I'm concerned about the plan to merge Lyndon McKinley STEM Academy and the Health Sciences Academies at the historic East High School. 4 years ago, when the agreement was ratified to enter the partnership to design and implement the Health Sciences Academies, including East High School, enrollment at East was at 393 students. According to the digital dashboard of Columbus City Schools, the enrollment for the 2017-18 school year was 564, and though I'm not a mathematician, that is a growth of 33% over 3 years. So while we are not even close to capacity, we are seeing incremental growth. When we began, the graduation rate was 61.74%. At the end of the 2017 school year, it was 69, and next year's report card will reflect a graduation rate of 74% for the 2018 school year. That is an increase of 12.26%. Those gains are significant given the decline of school-age residents in the geographic area because of the RAD conversions and because of gentrification of the Near East Side. And yet, families still choose to keep their kids at East High School. The word partner is defined as a person or entity who takes part in an undertaking with another or others, especially in a business or company with shared risks and profits. The HSA administrators, faculty, staff, and community partners, OSU and PACT, have worked diligently to develop a curriculum that would provide the rigor our children will need to meet the ever-increasing demands of them beyond their post-secondary education. We have been working diligently to infuse resources into all of the health sciences academies to support the curricular and co-curricular efforts of our administrators and our teachers. Over the past 3 years, PACT has invested more than $640,000 in resources via grants from the Governor's Office and the Franklin County Commissioners via the Franklin County Department of Job and Family Services. OSU has invested well over $200,000 in resources to support the health sciences academies. Clearly, the Ohio State University and Partners Achieving Community Transformation have been joint risk takers with the district. To not take into account the intentionality of engaging elementary, middle, and high school students to ensure alignment of the HSAs when making this proposal is disrespectful. To infuse Lyndon into East negates the whole purpose of the plan. So are the health sciences academies to be no more? Is that a decision that should have been made jointly with your partners as outlined in our MOU? Last month, the dispatch reported that 19 notorious gang members were arrested. All of those members were part of a sect of the Crips gang, and they resided in the Near East Side geographic area of Columbus. Unlike years of old, gang affiliation today is largely designated by affinity and affiliation with specific streets in specific neighborhoods. This plan does not take into account that students live very segregated lives based on the geographic areas in which they reside. Merging these two schools has the potential to create some physically dangerous school environments. For the reasons cited above, I am adamantly opposed to the plan that would include merging Lyndon McKinley STEM High School and the Health Sciences Academies at the historic East High School. Thank you.
Ms. Street. Are there clarifying questions from my colleagues? No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. Our next speaker, Christy McClure. Topic, physical condition of cause, board action requested. Listen to my concerns and develop a plan for cause. Ms. McClure, good evening.
How do you follow that?
Do your best.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohorik, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. My name is Christy McClure, and I want to start by saying that I am a mother of a freshman daughter at CAUSE. We are very excited to be a part of the CAUSE community. I will also say that I am a nurse by profession, and I have recently gotten into the realm of quality and process improvement. And that'll all make sense as I kind of go through some of this information. So you've heard about some of the physical condition concerns that we have at CAUSE, rodents, duct tape on pipes, falling ceilings, as I've heard, and in fact, we had a transformer explode last week. And certainly, as I'm sure all of you are aware, this building was built in 1926, and they definitely built them well back then, but they weren't designed to last forever. So in that amount of time, and CAUSE being implemented in 1978 with only 100 students, I learned that today. I learn something new every day. It's great. It was originally intended to be in the North High School building, as you probably know. But they put them there because that was kind of the first step. They said, get 100 people and we'll open for you. And they found 100 students, and they opened on the top floor of the building that they're currently located in. It was never designed to be the permanent space of that school, ever. It is an elementary school. I asked my daughter, how do you like school? It's CAUSE, aren't you excited? And she said, it's great. And I said, how do you like, do you have a great lunch? Do you enjoy eating? And she said, well, I don't eat. And I said, why? I'm a nurse, I'm a mother, why aren't you eating? And she said, well, on really nice days, the juniors and seniors eat out in the courtyard. She said, but on not so nice days, they come inside, and there isn't enough space in the cafeteria for us all to eat. And it is the underclassmen who have to give up their seats. She also doesn't pee because she doesn't feel comfortable going in a restroom that doesn't conceal and provide all the privacy that she requests. So I want to note the fact that this is not a new concern that parents have had at CAUSE. I know I am a new parent at CAUSE. She is a new student. But there has been a consistent history of inaction in regards to the concerns of the physical state of this building. In 2016, there was a revision made to the facilities management plan that was approved by this board. And in that, it actually placed CAUSE in the very next segment of buildings that needed attention. Now, I will tell you, in the past 2 years, this school district has spent $15.4 million on improvements to buildings, and $0 of that has gone to CAUSE. And in fact, $2.2 million has gone to some of those schools that are in those segments surrounding CAUSE, and again, $0 of that money has gone to address our concerns. Last year, two students came before the board. Two CAUSE students came before the board to share their concerns. And I asked this board, what was done to address those needs? What has been done to address those concerns? And finally, this year, the task force, and I looked at all of the PowerPoints because that's what I do, consistently listed in the beginning as they were discussing what to do with North, and they said on their CAUSE to be addressed outside of this task force. And I was like, yes, the needs are going to be addressed. And then all of a sudden, that fell off the PowerPoint and it went away. And it was no longer stated and it was no longer talked about. Where did it go? Where did it go? So I ask you, in a process improvement standpoint, what criteria are being used to prioritize the work? Both the work that is being done through Operation Fix-It and the work that is being done through the facilities management plan. What will it take for immediate action from this board to address our concerns? And finally, I will ask you, this is not a question about air conditioning. This is not a question about, wouldn't it be great if we had comfy chairs? This is a concern about the physical safety and health of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions from my colleagues? Thank you, Ms. McClure. Our final speaker, Sally Gibson. Topic, closing of Mifflin Middle School. Board action requested, be proactive with children and reconsider not closing Mifflin Middle School. Good evening.
Good evening, President Baker, Vice President Cole, Treasurer Bohorik, Internal Auditor Smith, members of the board, and Interim Superintendent Dr. Stanford. I am Deborah Pickens, president of the Columbus, Ohio Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Welcome.
I am Sally Gibson, president of Women to Women, also a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. We are two of the corporate community partners at Mifflin Middle School and strong supporters that the recommendation of the task force to merge and close Mifflin has an enormous failing mark and severe consequences and devastation upon a neighborhood community. The report of the task force, I question their IQ being their interest in quality academics for our children and not fully reporting or considering the tremendous devastation brought about by relocating Mifflin Middle. To merge Medina Middle, who is a low-performing school, with Mifflin Middle, who is no longer in this category. A school that has a report card grade of B in progress, and the numerous awards and recognition by academic groups and the Ohio Department of Education for Improved Excellence in 2016, occurring within 1 year of Ms. Cosin assuming leadership and her implementation of addressing the desire of volunteers in the neighborhood to serve and have corporate neighbors invest in their neighboring school. Medina is smaller in size and has not had the same academic gains, and yet we seek to tear apart a community and relationships built in the neighborhood surrounding Mifflin Middle. It is really baffling that Columbus City Schools is afraid to be a leader and on the forefront and cutting edge of new and improved methods of engaging students and parents, motivating learning, empowering our children to embrace their future through academics, character building, and challenging them. Easy as 1, 2, 3, what the return on our investment is. Tracy Cosin has motivated children beyond their greatest fears. She is one who invests in children. The staff invests in children. We, the community partners and the neighborhood, are invested in the children at Mifflin Middle School, which is in our neighborhood. Ms. Cosin came 4 years ago with a plan to invest and there be a successful return on this investment. This allows such groups as Women to Women, Columbus Christian Center, Faith Ministries, Alliance Data, East End Foundation, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Sam's Clubs, Lowe's, Huntington National Bank, Chase Bank, and more of those type of neighborhood partners to invest our time, our lunch hour, and our flexible hours in mentoring and being a part of these children's lives.
We talked a lot about community, and I am a factual person, so I'll take a couple seconds. Research by the Urban Institute found that school closures can be part of a cycle of disenfranchisement and disinvestment. Neighborhoods surrounding closed schools have fewer resources than the neighborhoods surrounding open schools. These neighborhoods had lower earnings, higher poverty rates, lower college completion rates, and lower home values than neighborhoods surrounding open schools. 8% of Delta's members live in the 43219 area code. Mifflin's leadership is doing its part, bringing innovation, school pride, community engagement, and improvement in the community. Delta and the other corporate partners are doing their part through programming, involvement, and support of the children. I ask that the board do its part and evaluate the closures as more than a right-sizing issue, but evaluate it on its impact to the community. Thank you.
We thank you, and to avoid doing a Part B next week, there are 25 reasons that we have mentoring programs in Mifflin Middle School, and if you care about them, we invite you to come, sit, and take a look at what the community is doing in our neighborhood, Mifflin Middle School.
Thank you. Are there any clarifying questions? Madam President and Soror Gibson, thank you for being here this evening. We appreciate the time you took to be here with us. Yes, ma'am. Are any clarifying questions from my colleagues? All right, those were our final speakers. And so Thank you very much. I do appreciate the time all of you took to be here with us this evening. Please feel free to stay for the remainder of the meeting if you like, but if you do need to leave, we understand. Thank you very much. Let's move on then to our interim superintendent report. Dr. Stanford, I will turn the floor over to you, and as we discussed, we'll have the presentation from the task force during your report.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Board of Education. Before I introduce Mr. Varner to give the presentation on the facilities task force work, I want to publicly thank Ms. Perry Savity and Mr. Jim Negron for their exceptional work as co-chairs of the task force. I want to thank the task force members, and some of them are here this evening, for their great dialogue and their thoughtful questions throughout the entire process. I want to thank Ms. Stockert, our Chief of Staff, and Mr. Alex Trevino, our Director of Capital Improvements, for their leadership in co-chairing our internal team of administrators that supported the work of this task force over the last several months. I want to thank the internal team of administrators for their many hours of data collection, data analysis, and debate about the issues that we have heard tonight and some that we haven't heard tonight. Finally, I want to thank the community for being engaged and participating in this very important process. It is a process that is a difficult process, that we all have to weigh many, many factors in order to come to a conclusion. As we all know, this is very difficult work for the district and for those individuals who have participated on that task force and for the administrators who supported that work. I want the board to know this evening that this group of administrators and community members that have participated on this process gave it their all and did all that they could to consider all of the factors that are important to this decision. And they did all of this because they wanted to do what is in the best interest of our students and do what is best for this community as a whole. And so with that, Mr. President, members of the board, I will invite Mr. Scott Varner to present the task force report.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And before Mr. Varner begins, I know that co-chair Negron will not be with us this evening, and I know that his wife Sandra has just recently passed away within the last few days. So I might offer that we take just a moment of silence for Ms. Negron. Thank you for that. Mr. Varner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, President Baker. Thank you, members of the board. Throughout the process, I often had an opportunity to facilitate the conversations of the task force, as well as present the recommendations as part of our community meetings. And so I'm fortunate to have this opportunity to share with you the final recommendations put forward and voted on by the task force to be shared officially with you tonight. I thought it important to take a moment to remind everyone of the charge of the task force that was given by this board and by our interim superintendent to be a community-led task force. All of the members of the task force were part of our community representing various neighborhoods, various constituency groups, representing the diversity of our community. It was their job to review the data and make recommendations not only on our schools but also our administrative buildings. Those recommendations had to be based upon an objectivity of factors listed in board policy, as well as those voted upon and agreed to by the task force. And when they put their recommendations together, those recommendations had to have a solid statement of rationale, which we'll share with you tonight. And then, of course, we put the timeline in place for them to have their final report by October to share with you in November, recognizing that part of this timeline is also making sure that any decisions that are made would allow us then to implement them as part of our school choice process, the lottery process, which begins in January. So as the task force began, the two parts of their mission were first to examine how the use of our buildings were to the best benefit of our students. In other words, the ways in which we use our buildings, are they providing the best academic opportunities and best benefits to our students. At the same time, also looking to make sure they were using those resources most efficiently and effectively. Are we using our buildings the most efficient and effective ways? Following that, they looked at a series of data points, both quantitative, qualitative, and then looking at any potential impacts that might come from any recommendations. What did that look like? So in the first phase of examination, that quantitative data looked at student raw numbers, student enrollment, building utilization. When you look at the number of students compared to the space of the building, what were the conditions of the building? Is it one of our older buildings? Is it a building that has already been renovated or replaced? And then also the transfer in and transfer out rates, the number of students that live in a neighborhood, do they attend the school of their neighborhood, or do they choose to transfer out? So those were the quantitative data points that were looked at. We looked at all 110 schools. All 110 schools were looked at. Those 110 schools were looked at again as part of phase 2, as we began to look at the qualitative measurements. Everything from the educational programming that goes on to the building, the safety and access, the accessibility for our students who may have disabilities, working with our partners at MORPC to look at residential trends and which parts of our city were expected to see growth in families where you would have school-aged children. We looked at grade band design. We even looked at the numbers and types of work orders that come in each day where we have to send a repair person out to a building. And finally, for any of those buildings where there could have been a potential recommendation, the task force wanted to look at impact. What would be the impact to other buildings should there be a change? What would be the impact to a neighborhood or to a student body? It has been a very thorough process that began when the task force first got together in April. As you can see through this timeline, a number of meetings, including community meetings, that brings us to November and the presentation to you. You'll recall that the task force came up with a series of preliminary recommendations. These were the preliminary recommendations first shared with you, 5 of them involving our schools, and then 3 administrative site recommendations. Those recommendations were taken out to the community where we had impressive feedback. Thousands of voices throughout the city were heard as part of this feedback. And those messages, the feedback that we received was shared unfiltered and directly with all members of the task force. As a body, we did not try to rework them or group them in any. We allowed the task force to see everything that the community shared. We had our 7 meetings. We had hundreds of student responses during presentations that were held at the schools to be affected, our high schools to be affected. Email, phone, the app, a number of ways in which the community shared. Because of that community feedback, because of the information that was shared, the task force then looked at a series of alternative proposals. There were 12 total proposals that were examined by the task force for consideration based upon community feedback. As a body, the task force chose to move forward with 5 of these alternative scenarios, asked the internal work group to explore more information, and as you will see, one of those alternatives actually made it as a final recommendation. In their last meeting then, the task force did take a vote. We had a very detailed ballot for them to work through that allowed them to examine both the alternatives and the preliminary recommendations. So with that, let me walk through the final recommendations as prepared by the task force. And some of these will be familiar as they mirror the preliminary recommendations. The first one is a boundary change proposal. The task force is recommending that we adjust the attendance boundaries for Highland, West Broad, and Westgate elementaries. The reason, the rationale behind this is to better balance the utilization at all 3 buildings and improve safe access for students. I think it's easier if I flip to the map real quick. You can see the current boundaries for West Broad Elementary currently extend past West Broad Street, a very busy street. So part of the proposal is that you split that catchment zone that's on the other side of West Broad and split it between Highland Elementary and Westgate Elementary. As you see, the rationale given by the task force to do this is that West Broad Elementary is currently near full capacity while both Highland and Westgate are at lower utilization rate. So this will allow better balance. And it will also improve, it'll give more of our students access to improved space at Highland, which has received significant Operation Fix-It dollars. And then it also allows for that safe access to the buildings so students aren't crossing busy Broad Street or Hague Avenue. This recommendation from the task force would be an immediate implementation for next school year. Let me move to recommendation number 2. This is also a boundary change that involves Mays Elementary and North Linden Elementary. Similarly, Mays Elementary is under capacity, under enrolled, whereas North Linden is over capacity. So the idea here is to change the boundaries to better balance those enrollments. The adjustment also provides some improved service for our English as a second language students, those new American students in that neighborhood, because it would likely require us to add an additional ESL unit at Mays Elementary, and so we'd be able to serve more students that area. Again, here's the map that shows there's 2 catchment zones kind of on the north part of the current North Linden Elementary that would switch over and go to Mays Elementary. This too is a recommendation to move forward immediately beginning with the next school year. So that's recommendation 1 and recommendation 2. Let me move into recommendation 3, which gets, the next few recommendations get a little more complicated, a few more moving parts. So this recommendation asks the task force, recommends to the board that you relocate Columbus North International, the high school grades 9 through 12, to the former Brookhaven High School location to co-locate with our current Columbus Global Academy. At the same time, in the existing North High School building, the task force recommends that you relocate Dominion Middle School to that larger site and that you expand Dominion's academic program to include a language immersion. The language immersion curriculums to create language immersion programming for grades 6 through 8, which would allow you to not only at that program have the grades 7 and 8 from International, they're currently in that building, to stay, but allow you to move grade 6 from Columbus Spanish Immersion, from Ecole Kenwood, and from Hubbard Mastery into this Dominion Middle School expanded program, which we often refer to as the Dominion Plus program. I think the map, again, helps to better understand kind of the proposal. The purple area represents the current Dominion neighborhood. The purple dots represent those students currently attending Dominion. As you can see, many of those dots are just as close to the International building, to the North High School building, as they are to the current Dominion site. The red dots represent students who currently attend Columbus North International, those grades 9 through 12, who would be moving to Columbus Global, again, very close to where they currently live. This then shows where those other students would be coming from our language immersion programs, moving them from Spanish immersion, from Ecole Kenwood, also, and moving those as the same time that you're moving north into Columbus Global. Let me talk about the rationale. Again, each of these recommendations comes with the rationale, so that we know that the co-location of the Columbus North International program and the Columbus Global Academy would allow us to maximize the building usage at Brookhaven. It was also a favored recommendation as part of the facilities master plan process. Restoring the Columbus North International High School program back to that high school grade band, the 9 through 12 only, and then returning those middle school students to a true middle school experience is also something that we saw as a favored grade banding through the facilities task force. Now, to further address enrollment at Columbus North International, the task force also recommended that at Columbus Global, those students be given a reservation into the International High School if they would choose to stay there after completing the program as opposed to returning to their home school. Now, in these next series of recommendations, we also want to include some considerations for this move, some of the things that the board will need to consider should you make this decision. We know that the co-location of the Columbus North International High School program with Columbus Global Academy at the Brookhaven site is only possible if you're moving if those 7th and 8th graders stay at the North Building and co-locate with Dominion. In other words, because of the unpredictable fluctuation in Global's enrollment, Oftentimes not knowing, I mean, those are new Americans that come in, and so we may suddenly have an influx of students. Once you combine, if you were to try to combine that with all of the 7th and 8th graders and the 9th through 12th graders from international in that one building, you'd begin to have strain on the building. It may not be able to accommodate all 7 through 12 of Columbus North International. So that plan only works if those 7th and 8th graders stay at their current building and become part of that new Dominion program. Something that's also, so again, as we look at the rationale for the Dominion moves, we know that that North High School building that's in the Dominion community provides some much needed space. Dominion is currently operating about 120% of its capacity. The building does, the North building is not new, but it does feature significant renovations and many high school level accommodations. It would also be an opportunity to re-envision Dominion's academic program, which I think has received some favorable response during the task force process, allowing that dedicated middle school program as part of the language immersion pathway along with Hubbard Mastery. Often where we would see high transfer rates at the 6th grade level. So remember our language immersion programs currently are pre-K through 6th grade. Oftentimes we see a high number of transfer rates after 5th grade as those families look for a middle school environment. Again, we go back to this notion that by creating that middle school, we give those 6th graders that are coming from the language immersion programs, as well as the 7th graders and 8th graders from international, a true middle school experience. 6th graders are not in elementary school, 7th and 8th graders are not in high school. And the task force recommends for this one a 2-year implementation. In other words, not next year, but implementing in the 2021 school year. Let me move on to recommendation 4, or in this case 4B, because the task force did choose to examine an alternative that came up as part of the community feedback process. In this alternative, the task force is recommending the co-location of Buckeye Middle School at the Marion Franklin High School site. This would be the creation of 2 separate and distinct programs, not a 6-12, but a 6-8 and a 9-12 on the same campus with very distinct programs, separate principals and administration and services. That would then facilitate the closure of the Buckeye building. And as part of this alternative, the task force recommends the creation of a dedicated middle school at South High School. Again, separate programmings, a 6-8, 9-12. As part of that, the 6th graders who are currently at the schools feeding into South would move to this new middle school. So you're talking about Lincoln Park, Livingston, Moeller, Siebert, Stewart, and Southwood. Those 6th graders would move to this new middle school that's on the South High School campus. Also, as part of this is all together, it would include the adjustment of the attendance boundaries for Southwood Elementary and Stewart Elementary that would include the current Siebert neighborhood catchment and allow for the closure of Siebert. And the last part of this full proposal is the adjustment of Fairwood Elementary into the east feeder pattern, changing it from currently it feeds into South High School. We would instead change it into the east feeder pattern, and grade 6 would be assigned to Champion Middle School. Let me show you the maps first before we get into the rationale. This map shows the movement of students from Buckeye Middle School into Marion Franklin Middle School. This map shows the 6th graders who would be moving from those elementaries into the new South Middle School. So let me go through the rationale for the separate middle schools part of this. So this recommendation seeks to create separate middle schools, 6-8, 9-12s, not 6-12s. These are 6-8, 9-12 models, which provide the district, provide both distinct separation but also potential vertical collaboration. So collaboration for teachers at the middle school with the high school level, the ease of students to be able to take advantage of services at the high school level. By placing the middle school into the current Marion Franklin site, that allows us to address what is extremely low building utilization, currently at 53% at Marion Franklin High School, so we're able to fill up the building. The creation of that dedicated middle school at South High School now would provide for that more traditional grade banding. South High School currently is a 7-12. Now you would have a very distinct middle school for those young people in that neighborhood. Marion Franklin, as you know, is receiving significant Operation Fix-It dollars, including updated HVAC and air conditioning, which makes it a much more welcoming and larger facility than the current Buckeye Middle School, which does not have air conditioning. It's very hot. We know that moving those sixth graders out of the elementary schools creates that additional space at those elementary schools, which would allow teachers and staff to better address some of those non-academic barriers, our community partners to assist with that. It would also allow for additional pre-K classes at those schools pending any additional staffing and funding we might get through state or federal grants. As part of this part of the recommendation on the creation of a middle school at South, the co-location of Buckeye and Marion Franklin, the task force is saying 2 years on this one. So that would be implemented in the 2021 school year. The other half of this proposal is the reassignment of students at Siebert to Southwood and Stewart Elementaries. That would provide those students at Siebert with improved learning spaces in buildings that have been renovated. Both Southwood and Stewart have been renovated. That might also then draw more students from the neighborhood to return to their home school. We need to make sure that we note that the percentage of students currently assigned to Siebert, only about 7% live in that neighborhood. 19% are by choice and lottery. But the majority of students at Siebert are placed there by the district. The district has placed those students there for a number of reasons, including the English as a second language program and special education. Another part of the rationale, the move to Fairwood. Why would we move Fairwood into the east feeder pattern? By moving grade 6 into Champion, that allows those sixth graders to move into a renovated building, which also has air conditioning, allows those sixth graders to have that true middle school experience. The adjustment of Fairwood into the east feeder pattern also then increases utilization at Champion and then eventually at East. As those students matriculate through Fairwood, they then go on to Champion and then begin to help with the utilization at East. For this part of this recommendation, the task force is recommending this closure of Siebert and the reassignment of Fairwood for next school year, for the 1920 school year. Now again, we do have some considerations that the board should think about as part of this. We know that the co-location, the creation of a middle school in a high school campus does address the utilization concerns, the focus on making sure that we're utilizing the more of the building. However, it does not provide for those larger high school enrollments, which we know are a driving factor to having broader academic opportunities, including a greater number of alternatives, more diverse academic programming, more robust selection of electives and extracurricular activities. We know that when high schools have a larger student enrollment, you're able to offer more electives and also provide greater flexibility in scheduling. Another consideration that the board should have, the co-location, those creation of those middle school campuses actually might restrict future growth or expansion at the high school enrollment. Again, if you're suddenly now fully using a whole building, you would restrict that ability to grow those high schools a little bit more. We also know that the immediate closure of Siebert would create a one-time burden on those incoming sixth graders. So those sixth graders would have to transition to Southwood or Stewart next year, and then transition again to the new South Middle School in 2021. And so we always try to limit the number of transitions that a young person has in such a short amount of time. But at the same time, conversely, we also know that any kind of delayed closure of that building could also be problematic as you have a number of families or staff who might begin to seek alternatives during any type of transitional period. Let me move on to the final recommendation of the task force that involves Lyndon McKinley and East High School. The Facilities Task Force has recommended the conversion of Lyndon McKinley from a high school to a middle school, retaining the 7th and 8th graders at that building, and then reassigning the high school students to East High School. That would then be an adjustment of the East High School feeder pattern to include students that would come from Champion Middle School and this new Lyndon McKinley Middle School. At the same time, you would reassign the students from the 6th grades at the current STEM elementaries, the K-6s, pre-K-6s that currently feed into Lyndon McKinley. You move those 6th graders to this new Lyndon McKinley Middle School. And finally, as part of this, the task force is recommending the reassignment of middle school English as a second language, the units that are currently at Medina and Mifflin Middle Schools, just the ESL units, including the sheltered site, moving that to this new Lyndon McKinley Middle School. When you do that, then that decreases the total enrollment of both of those buildings at both Medina and Mifflin Middle School, allowing you to merge those buildings at Medina and close Mifflin Middle School. Again, let me show you the map just to give you a sense of the number of students and where they're being impacted. So this shows those students who currently, the 9th through 12th graders that currently live in the Lyndon McKinley area, that would then go to east. Then this map shows those 7th graders, those 6th graders who would then be moving to the new Lyndon McKinley Middle School. This map shows where those ESL units that are currently at Medina and Mifflin would be able to move to the Lyndon McKinley Middle School, and then those two geographic catchment zones would come together, all to feed into Medina. Let me share with you the rationale given by the task force. Again, we know that that larger grade level enrollment at a high school allows for more robust and diverse educational programming and extracurricular offerings, some of which currently are not available at East or Lyndon McKinley because of the smaller total enrollment. The merger of those high school programs, the 9-12 at Lyndon McKinley along with East, would address building utilization at both schools. Having two middle schools feeding into East would allow us to address the low utilization there, which is currently at 51%. It would also allow us to restore some of that traditional grade banding currently in the Lyndon McKinley feeder pattern, with true middle school experiences for students in that pattern, and for those, for the 7th and 8th graders currently at Lyndon, give them that true middle school, as well as for the 6th graders who are currently in those STEM programs. And again, by moving those 6th graders out of the elementary, that gives you additional space for pre-kindergarten, as well as for community partners, and that ability for us to address those non-academic barriers. Also, the reassignment of the ESL sheltered site and ESL units from Medina and Mifflin, placing them into the Lyndon McKinley building, which has updated spaces, since it is a renovated building with air conditioning, would benefit those ESL students. And then combining both of those would allow for the closure of the Mifflin Middle building, which does have some significant infrastructure needs. And again, the task force on this one is recommending a 2-year implementation. Now, we think it's important to, again, offer some considerations. These are the things that the board should consider prior to making a recommendation, to following this recommendation, that we know that the Lyndon McKinley High School program has significant history, a significant legacy within the Lyndon community. And though the school would remain open and continue to serve the neighborhood, that change really would require the community to alter its perception of the school and its continued support for middle school students and the student activities. The merger does eliminate a specific high school for the Lyndon community, though there are other neighborhoods throughout our city that don't have specific high schools. As you heard mentioned earlier, the city does have the recently introduced One Lyndon plan, which could affect this decision based upon which elements of the One Lyndon plan are implemented. The new middle school proposal does meet part of the plan's call for connecting schools and social services. Those social services would be able to use those middle school spaces to provide direct services to those families. However, the plan also calls for offering monetary incentives for students to attend schools in the Lyndon neighborhood, which could lead to some uncharted expansion of students returning to home school or attempting to lottery into that Linden-McKinley feeder pattern if there's a financial incentive to attend schools in that neighborhood. And finally, as you've heard tonight, Mifflin Middle School has made tremendous gains as part of an overall transformation with notable growth in family engagement and business and community support. And so we would really have to have further stakeholder engagement to determine how best to continue that support in the academic gains after the proposed merger. So that's a walkthrough through the 5 school recommendations. Let me just quickly run through. There are 3 recommendations on administrative sites. The first, the task force is recommending the task force is recommending the district come up with immediate plans to move existing operations and programming out of 3 locations and work to close those buildings. That would be the Morris Road Bus Compound, the former Beery Middle School, which is currently the Marion Franklin Opportunity Center, and the Adult Education Center at Lexington Avenue. Next, the task force is recommending that the district identify plans to relocate existing operations out of 3 other buildings and potentially move those to newer facilities or different facilities that could accommodate the functions, and that could include the Southland facility that is on the south side of town that the district recently purchased. Those buildings where we would look to relocate, to come up with plans to relocate, would be the Linnmore Education Center, our 17th Avenue facility, and the Hudson Distribution Center. And finally, the task force, recognizing that some of our administrative buildings will take a lot more study to determine the feasibility, the cost, even the potential of relocation, suggests that you take a closer and more of a long-term look at closing or changing the our downtown building here, our Central Education Center and campus, the Food Production Center, the Kingswood Data Center, and the Fort Hays Transportation Compound. So those are the recommendations prepared and voted upon by the task force. If I may, the task force also, as they closed out, wanted to, over those 7 months, they really did take a very in-depth look at the data. They had widespread community conversations, a very thoughtful deliberation. And so the members of the task force thought it important in their report to also share with you a number of the challenges and opportunities they would like us as a district to consider that often fell beyond the charge given to them. And so some of those words of wisdom that they share, you can see to always focus on what's best for students and for the academic benefit of our students, to focus on all who work in our schools to educate our students, and really to focus on student services and on staffing our buildings with experts who support student success. I won't take time to read through all of the points because I know you've had an opportunity to read through them as well. But other elements that they've asked you to consider are the impact to some of our specific student services, whether it be special education or to our New American families, to consider the impact on staffing, examining what the benefits, potential benefits of any of these school closures might be on our budgets and on our programming, examining why students are even leaving to go to charter schools. They specifically asked and recommended that the board consider not only what the changes to the Dominion program might be, but also addressing the conditions that cause much of what you heard tonight. They wanted to make sure that as a district we thought more about how any kind of consolidation, how would you rename the buildings, how would you work on those consolidation plans, how do you start to digitize memorabilia so that it doesn't get lost in any kind of moves. And finally, they also made sure that we recommended that we consider looking at how this process will affect the facilities master plan, how it will affect Operation Fix-It and any other available programs, making sure that as a district we consider how we will clearly communicate all of these changes to our stakeholders, our students, our families, our community as a whole. And then the task force recommended finally that we should consider finding ways to engage more of the elected officials in our community outside of the schools to be more engaged in our schools. And so with that, I will close in saying that a copy of this presentation along with information about all of the recommendations is available on our website, and we know that a number of folks have been looking at it. Thank you, President Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Varner. for all of your hard work along with the task force. If there are members of the facilities task force who are in the room and/or any staff who supported the task force, please stand or raise your hand so you can be recognized. Thank you. All right. Now, having heard that, Ms. Gibbs, saw your hand. Yes, ma'am.
President Baker, thank you for that. I'd like to thank the members of the... Hello. Thank you. I again want to join in and thank the members of the committee and all of the hundreds of families and community people who have participated either online or in person or caught us in a grocery store or anywhere we have been to share with us their thoughts and feelings about this. And having thought about this, President Baker, I'd like to offer a resolution concerning these recommendations. Do I need to read the whole resolution or the spirit? I'll offer the whole one.
Do all of our colleagues have a copy of the resolution? Did you provide that to everyone?
This is something I asked them.
I do not have a copy of this.
Well, here.
I haven't looked at it.
Well, here. Will you hand it to?
Board Member Ray.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But after thinking about this, and thank you to our board services, Dr. Roush, okay, thank you. Thank you to Dr. Roush in helping me gather these thoughts today. Let me offer this resolution. Whereas on February 20th, 2018, the Columbus Board of Education charged the interim superintendent to create a facilities task force comprised of internal and external participants to identify and present to the Board of Education recommendations for school consolidations, possible impacted student enrollment, attendance zones, and administrative consolidations and relocations. And whereas the Facilities Task Force presented its preliminary recommendations to the board on September 4th, 2018, based upon quantitative and qualitative data metrics. And whereas the 7 community meetings were held together to gather additional input and alternative concepts in September and October 2018. And whereas the Facilities Task Force considered its preliminary recommendations based upon this input and additionally reviewed alternative concepts provided through these community meetings. And whereas the Facilities Task Force finalized its recommendations for consideration by the board on October 22nd, 2018. Now therefore be it resolved that the Columbus Board of Education extends its sincere appreciation and gratitude to the individuals who served on the Facilities Task Force. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education directs the interim superintendent to implement recommendations 1, recommendations 2, as well as administrative site recommendation 2 and administrative site recommendation 3 of the Facilities Task Force. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education directs that no action be taken on recommendation 3, but that the interim superintendent continue to study the various components of that recommendation. And be it further resolved that the Board of Education directs that no further action be taken on recommendation 4B, recommendation number 5, and administration recommendation number 1. And be it further resolved that the action of this board via this resolution constitutes the closure of this process.
Moved and seconded. Colleagues, is there discussion on the resolution before us related to the task force presentation? Board Member Hudson.
So, President Baker, in the spirit of, I've heard this before when I've done a Perry Mason resolution. I have not had a chance to do this, but also I thought we were having this presentation so we could ask questions, so we could talk about it. You know, I have concerns about kicking, as I know this is a very emotional process and emotional concern, but we also need to deliberate this. You know, we have community volunteers and staff that have spent 7 months putting together data, looking at this in a very data-driven, analytical fashion, as well as gathering a lot of community feedback. The recommendations were revised with feedback and move forward. this is doing a split-second resolution of this nature, in my opinion, really is all emotion and really is a disservice to our volunteers and staff that have spent so long working on this. I have a number of questions. I have thoughts. I think, I've heard so many comments. I don't think anyone's suggesting that performance, this isn't a penalty for anyone. This is not a penalty for anyone to suggest closing or moving. But this is rather, it's also not intended to harm, to penalize a neighborhood, and certainly that's a concern. It's about partnering with the city, partnering with others to deal with neighborhoods. But I think, excuse me. Well, thank
Please
you.
continue, Board Member Hudson.
I will.
Yes, ma'am.
Your gavel works all ways. I would just say.
Board Member Hudson?
Yes.
I realize that, and I thank you for that acknowledgement.
Well, thank you.
Please do continue.
I think that it's very important that we consider this seriously and not just by knee-jerk reaction and say, well, no, we're not going to do any of this. We have, and now, is it done? No. But we have, in addition to these bills, what this doesn't address, and I think one of the last bullet points was regarding Operation Fix-It and other things, we have numerous facilities. We have a $175 million facilities improvement deficit. We haven't funded that at all, not $1. We are funding through the 2016 levy and some of those capital improvements, some of that. So these dollars aren't just, this isn't just about closing and penalizing schools. This is also about having resources to take care of everyone. This is about everyone. And so I guess I'd like to have a discussion, a fulsome board discussion, not just now, but I understand we were going to deal with this at the next meeting, on these issues, so we come to a discussion that respects and recognizes the very deep analysis that was and work that was done through the facilities task force, but likewise considers all of our students, and considers the finite resources we have. And we don't want to point fingers at what happened in the past or planning or otherwise. This is like what the hand we're dealt right now. But I would not support doing a resolution like this tonight. I'd like to talk about it more, and I think, especially given that our ranks are pretty low right now, ramming something like this through without thinking about it in a little bit more detail, I think is a disservice to, and really disrespectful to everyone that served on that task force, as well to our team that worked with them.
Board Member Hudson, thank you very much for those comments. Any and all questions related to the task force recommendations they're germane to this resolution, so we can indeed have a full discussion on the recommendations at this point. So, yes, Board Member Hudson.
Should we not talk about all of that before we have a prefabricated solution in front of us that is significantly different from those task force recommendations?
Board Member Hudson, the majority of the board will decide that question this evening.
I know, ram it down our throat.
Board Member Hudson?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions? Board Member Reyes.
Thank you, President Baker. So I apologize for my voice, but I've had the opportunity to attend a lot of these community meetings. So I have had the opportunity to hear directly from our community. That's what we're elected to do. I understand the hard work that was put into it. I don't believe this is a disrespect to those individuals. Especially us, our administration. My biggest concern is our grade in our academics. So I would rather have our resources, our time, our community, our administrators be concentrated on our academics of our students. Even though I there are some things here that talk about how moving people around impacts it, but we also know moving people around, having people be worried about what school they're going to be going to, closing a facility, combining communities that should not be combined, listening to our children talk about how this impacts them. I had different solutions or different opinions of the preliminary discussion, but listening to the people who are in our buildings, I think one of our class parents mentioned the people who are there every day. I feel I need to also respect their opinions and their everyday situations as we're looking at it. So I look at it as I respect that you have questions, and I think we should answer questions if you have questions, but I also do not want our community worried about these things while we should be worried about moving academics forward. So that's where I kind of come from. That's where I'm coming from.
I will ask those of you in the audience to refrain from applauding, just in the essence of time. Yes, Board Member Hudson?
But isn't the time, aren't we doing this now, and isn't the timing of this so that we can appropriately plan for academics and address the academics in the go-forward basis? I guess I think that has been held primary, and it's the timing of the planning that is the issue. The other thing is we've heard a lot of commentary tonight, and I know in other settings regarding cause. And this resolution it's silent on cause, and certainly certainly one question I have, and I think any final resolution we come to should say that, within the next 6 months, we have to find a solution and a new home for cause. And if part of pushing off action on 4B and 5, it says 6, but I don't know that there is a 6. Oh, admin 6, admin 1. Pushing on 4B and 5, it should include, I think, also finding resolution and a solution for the issues with respect to the cause facility.
The maker of the motion, I assume, may consider accepting an amendment if one were offered. Other questions or comments?
Motion, so moved.
What would be the 6 months is short.
Would you, Board Member Hudson, would you restate or state the motion?
I was first opposing the whole thing, so.
Can I offer?
Would you yield to Board Member Gibbs?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes, this is the opportunity during this point is to have a discussion. And so as you said, Board Member Hudson, you have questions. So I think this is the time that you ask. I think this is the time that you ask the questions that you have. So if you have a list of questions, I would think that during this discussion period, we don't have a time limit, so we can discuss it, or you can ask your questions now. But ever since the presentation, I will say that our administration, to their very credit, and the members of the committee have been open. They've asked us to send them questions. We've sent questions and we've asked. But to your point, if you want to have those questions and those discussions now, I think so. And then I just wanted to say that this is the time to ask your questions if you haven't asked them already. And then I think, thank you, Vice President Coates. I saw you had your hand up. So.
Colleagues, Mr. Vice President?
No, I'm just waiting to yield to Board Member Hudson's response for questions.
It's kind of a gun to the head solution here. Like, here we go. Okay, I assumed until I learned this afternoon there would be some resolution, and I see the resolution as we arrive here today. And so what that's the issue. So for example, the resolution also tables administrative recommendation number 1. That doesn't affect academics at all. It has the Marion Franklin Opportunity Center. One of my questions would be with regard to that. As the recommendations on page the notes on page 34, it says the center could be located somewhere else. I'm wondering why it is could and shouldn't it be would? And including that, I mean, that's a small but important thing, but I think that's the only academic-related issue for administrative recommendation number one. I think those facilities, if they can be closed, we could then begin the process to sell them, and that would help, again, pay for maintenance on other buildings, which we desperately need to do. It'll go to Operation Fix-It and those unfunded items. My other question is, why isn't this facility on that list of administrative recommendations? We have this new, nice facility down on South High Street. This is a great property.
It is on
It is? Okay, then.
It is.
Board Member Hudson, downtown CEC is part of administrative recommendation number 3. It's for additional study.
Additional study.
Additional study. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like close and move.
All right. Vice President Cole?
Yes, Mr. President, if there is no amendment to be presented, I'm sorry.
I got a comment. First you said you want questions.
Then you want the like, okay, are we? You're going to push this through? Then I'll ask for an amendment. But I have to raise a significant objection to ramming this through in this manner, in this emotional manner, when there's been 7 months of hard study done on these recommendations.
Board Member Hudson, an amendment you might offer, or you might suggest that we table or postpone vote on this issue this evening.
That would be my preference, yes.
You may offer that.
Then I move that we table this until our next meeting.
Okay, so we have a motion. And so I would second that, so we can at least discuss it and vote on it. So, and you'd like to table it just simply to give us that additional time that we had talked about having between presentation and a final vote? Okay. All right. Discussions on tabling? Yes, Ms. Gibbs.
Yes, thank you very much. For the past 7 months, this committee has worked, and we had significant community engagement. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've been engaged from day one. And so I don't need additional time. And what I feared is what it has happened. We are now pitting one school against the other, one community against the other. We are now focused on buildings and not the people and the programming that's going inside it. We've had enough. And the beauty of this board is that under a different time, this is never a closed door. You can bring it back, but as for this chapter needs to close. And we have in front of us an incredible academic program and a surge that we need to focus on, not putting together programs where we don't already have the answers, and not disrupting our school and taking our focus off of academics. We have schools and staff that have checked out because they don't know if they're going to be open or not. So teaching and learning beyond the heat in the buildings and the incredibly long-term ridiculous conditions at COS from 92 when I was there until on it. If your mind is not there, which our staff and our students aren't there, we're not going to do what we're in business to do, which is teach and learn. And so we need to take this off the table, move forward those ideas that help us achieve the operational efficiencies for those facilities. This resolution helps us get those buildings moved so they can consider who goes to the Southland facility. And if those boundary changes are great opportunities, and we're going to continue to study what to do with our downtown properties. But those other ones, I think we consider moving them forward, and this has been well thought out. It's not knee-jerk for me because we have been at every meeting we possibly can be at. And so I've heard from the community, and they did not mix their words. And so I don't need a secret decoder ring to know that it's not supported. And so I do not support tabling this motion.
Colleagues, other comments on the amendment before us or the tabling? Yes, Board Member Reyes.
So Board Member Hudson, are you asking time to add additional things to this? Is that what you're asking? Or are you opposing?
I'm just seeing this, so I'm listening through, so thinking through this as example, I just again ask, why table administrative recommendation number 1? If maybe President Baker could ask Board Member Gibbs.
Oh, yes.
Why that would be tabled as opposed to moving that up to the implementation resolution.
On implementation number 1?
We should limit our discussion at this juncture as to whether or not we are going to table.
Oh, we have an amendment on the table.
I call for the question.
So, Mr. Treasurer, would you mind calling the roll on whether or not to table the resolution before us this evening?
Well, President Baker,
I beg your pardon.
if it would interfere with the discussion, I'll withdraw that motion pending discussion.
Is that allowable?
She has the motion, so she can withdraw it.
Very
That's
well
fine.
then. So we are now back to our main motion, and so I do believe that Ms. Hudson had offered a question that is related to administrative recommendation number 1. Ms. Gibbs, were you prepared to respond to that?
Sure. These are my thoughts. Around recommendation number 1 and around, I know the continual hard work that our team is doing around transportation. It continues to be a challenge to access all of our students across the city with such a robust transportation program, and that primarily the Morse Road bus compound, while it is small, it still serves a very critical role in terms of getting our students where they need to be. And so before we move all of them to any one location, we need to really study how we can best and more effectively get all of our students to where they need to go, and we're not there yet. And as far as the Berry Marion Franklin Opportunity Center, which is adjacent, it is on the property to Marion Franklin. So the resurgence or to come back from any of that, it is the closest property. It literally, you walk through it like Huey and Medina, that we need to think, I don't support disposing of it before we explore it all. We have a new superintendent coming on board, and there may be some new vision and some new ideas on how to leverage these opportunities, and this one in particular. I think the other two are fine, but these two I think have significant changes that I would want to wait to see if there's an additional idea or recommendation of that use. It is literally next door to Marion Franklin. And so while we're talking about, as I said, when we started, which is why I'm very resolute, when we closed Berry, we closed the pipeline to Marion Franklin. We, with our pen, signed the death sentence to Marion Franklin, same way closing Clinton choked out Brookhaven. And so before we let this property, I would like to see us have additional conversations. So I'm not in support of moving that forward. And those are my ideas.
Yes, Ms. Hudson.
So I'd like to ask the superintendent, or if maybe the team could field the issue about the bus compound. I'd like to hear what the basis is for including this, because while I hear what you say, Board Member Gibbs, I think it was supported by significant data that this was closable. So.
Superintendent?
Mr. President, to Ms. Hudson, I'll ask Mr. McElroy and Mr. Oldham, having a hard time remembering his name, Mr. Oldham to respond to that question.
President Baker, Board Member Hudson. So initially in this process for the compounds, Morse Road came on board, and it's been come up several times. At Morse Road compound, we currently house 169 buses, and the thought, and it does serve our northern community. The thought at that time was, and still is that we can move some of those buses between our two compounds, which would be our Freebus site as well as our Fort Hays site. With that move, though, there comes some infrastructure things that we do need to take place prior to those moves. For example, you're moving buses to a site that currently have X number of gas pumps now, X number of garage, because we're not only moving buses, we're also relocating 2 garages that supports those. So there would need to be some infrastructure work that needs to take place. But the thought was also, don't forget that it also talked about with the Fort Hayes site in some of the studies, Fort Hayes site still also need to be studied. And so eventually, no one knows with the Fort Hayes site, maybe with the study determined that there needs to be a more feasible site to help support north and south. But right now, if we were to move the Morris Road site, we would divvy those buses up. It's not an even split, but from moving out of the Fort Hayes and Freebie site is how we would support that. So in the plan for the facility task force when it came up, we felt and feel we could support the move, but there would need to take some infrastructure work to make that happen.
Mr. McElroy.
President Baker, Vice President Cole, and board members, this is an opportunity to talk about what's needed for our children. This is an opportunity to talk about what's needed for our community. I truly understand that our committee met and discussed the needs of our transportation department. But you too, just like many of our board members and I, are from this city. And at the stores, they've talked to me about our compounds. At various places, they've talked to us about the things that our children need, which is obviously transportation. And our task force definitely looked at that data relative to absorbing the Morris Road compound into our other compounds. And we stated that infrastructure is needed to absorb them. It was mentioned in our conversations that not just for the buses, for our bus drivers, for our aides, for our intervention aides, our child care attendants, et cetera. And again, it was mentioned that they have what they need to be able to function day by day to offer the services for our students. I say that because I truly agree that Mr. Odom stated that we did our work to make sure it can be absorbed. We did our work to make sure that we understand that it can be absorbed in our other compounds. But I do want to make sure that we never forget the fact that it was mentioned that we have to make sure that infrastructure is in place for those fuel pumps for 843 buses, for parking for close to 900 employees, and other things that are needed for our mechanics to make sure that we provide the services for our students to make sure that we reach 95% on-time performance to get our children to school. So yes, we definitely did our due diligence, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we look at everything to make sure that we are giving our students and our staff everything they need to succeed relevant to transportation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
I think also, there was a serious effort by the task force in regards to our administrative sites to consolidate as much as we possibly can, because with our administrative sites being so dispersed around the district, there's a certain amount of cost associated with that. And so through consolidation, we then save resources that can then be put back into the classroom.
Sure. Thank you, gentlemen. Yes, ma'am.
To me, it sounds like rather than being an action, it should be more of a study item.
Yeah, it needs to move up to the.
It would move up as a study.
It needs to move up.
Because it sounds like it's not that it couldn't be done or it shouldn't be done, but that it isn't, like, we can't add water and stir. We would have to, we'd still have to spend money to do that, and would that be worthwhile? Is that, am I, maybe, would, so, yeah.
So you may be formulating an amendment related to administrative recommendation number 1?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want to noodle on that for a while?
So, well, look, can I try? May I try?
Yes, ma'am.
So in the first resolution, so where it says, be it further resolved, Board of Education, so we would add, implement, so it would be, oh, in the.
So he does continue to study.
Oh, so it would be in number 2, pardon me, yes, you're right. So.
President Baker, why she's,
Yes, Ms. Gibbs, quickly.
I'm sorry, while she's figuring that out, I think Vice President Cole had his hand up to speak. Did you want to speak? Otherwise, I just want to do a commercial to thank all my bus drivers and everybody in transportation for your amazing due diligence. This is not easy work, and the idea of the thousands of students that we transport is very crucial. But I know every piece, like Donato's, every piece is important. And when you move, it's not it might be small, but 169 buses is significant. So thank you for all you do. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbs. Mr. Vice President, do you want to offer something as the
It's just a
amendment's
question.
prepared? Yes.
Okay, so in the administrative question that we're talking about right now, where it is located in the be it further resolved that the Board of Education directs that no further action be taken on recommendations, et cetera, that does not negate, and this is not a statement, it's a question, does it negate having this conversation in the future? Does it negate bringing this back to the table for revised dialogue and subsequent decision and action?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so
However-
then it
however-
doesn't weaken the merits. It's just my question. But so given that that's the case, this doesn't weaken the merits of the resolution? Okay. That's all I needed to know, so we can make a decision.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Again, I don't disagree, but we are just getting this right now, so.
So I
do have
Yes,
a
ma'am, please.
suggestion. So, in the second, I think with Board Member Raz's assistance, this doesn't have to be attributed to her, but in that second resolution, where it says directs that no action be taken on adding administrative recommendation number 1 before the word recommendation number 3. So it would say administrative recommendation number 1 and then recommendation number 3. And then, but that the interim superintendent continue to study the various components of those recommendations and report back to the board. And then, so that would be for that particular resolution, and then for a new one, resolve that the Board of Education directs that the interim superintendent study and identify an alternative location solution for Columbus Alternative High School.
Oh. Do you mind if we bifurcate that? Can we split that into two?
Yes, it would be two separate,
Okay.
that would be a separate paragraph.
Okay, two different amendments, though, that you're offering.
Well, it's two separate paragraphs. If you'd like to take
I would.
each one as a separate thing.
Okay. So the first amendment that is offered is that we would direct the interim superintendent to continue to do additional study on administrative recommendation number 1. And so is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved in second. Any further discussion on that?
I
Yes,
would
Ms. Hudson.
ask in the form, so that we add to it also that, and that there's a report back to the board.
Okay. Has that been captured, duly captured?
I can
Watch the
provide
movie
it to the treasurer. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, discussion on that amendment.
Yep, so for clarity, you're offering an amendment under the the second, be it further resolved clause, that as we study recommendation 3, which is the global in Columbus North International, that we also study administrative site recommendation 1.
Yes.
I move the question.
Okay, so
then there's
there's,
some, and then at the end say that those recommendations, so that would be, and then and
Change it
report
to
back
plural.
to us.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, amendment's been offered, there is a second discussion. I'm prepared to vote if you are on the amendment. Not typically, no. But thank you for offering. Mr. Treasurer? Colleagues?
Mr. Baker, we've congratulated them on their work, right?
No, thank you, Mr. Horn. Thank you. All right, so we have an amendment that's been offered. We have
wasn't-
a second. We have discussion. Mr. Treasurer?
You're clear on the amendment, because we can
Yes.
we can get it
She'll
from the
provide
tape
the
if
verbiage.
necessary. Okay, you're clear on what amendment you're voting on. All right, good. Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs? Yes. Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
Yes.
The amendment to the motion on the floor has carried.
Okay, so we are back to an amended motion, and I think we have something from Board Member Hudson.
Just as a companion amendment to that, what we just discussed, then in the third, be it resolved, we would delete that phrase at the end, and administrative recommendation number 1, from the end of that one.
Is that a given or do we have to
Yes,
vote
and I
that?
do believe that that was part of the original amendment
Okay,
as you offered,
just-
and
I
it
just
was
clarified.
approved. Yes.
I hadn't
yes, ma'am.
said that.
Thank you.
I
Board
do
Member
a
Gibbs?
second one.
Okay, Board
Well,
Member
yeah.
Gibbs?
And I want to offer this to my dear alma mater. To your point about studying the Columbus Alternative High School, which we need desperately, but in a separate 6-month process under the Facilities Master Plan, under the ad hoc committee that both Board Member Peretti and I chaired, we did almost the same extensive amount of data and work on the conditions of COS. And on all of the facilities, they are in the very next Facilities Master Plan to be rebuilt. I want to hear, and my question is to the administration, can you tell us what has been done? Because I don't want to assume that there's no plan to address the conditions at Columbus Alternative High School. Before we make an amendment, I would want to know what has been done, because as soon as we get to put a bond on the ballot, they are in the Section 3B, which means they're getting a brand-new building anyway. So I would want to hear, or maybe take an opportunity to hear what has already been done, and if there's any temporary relief, but we are getting a brand-new building, and we're not going to get a patchwork duct tape piece of a quilt that we've been working in so far, but I don't want to assume that there hasn't been anything, because I know you have been working, because you've heard these concerns for years. So can we give the administration the opportunity to talk about what they've done?
Thank you, Board Member Gibbs. Without objection, then I'll call on the superintendent.
Mr. Baker, to Ms. Gibbs, I call on Mr. Trevino to come up, and he'll be assisted by Mr. Oldham as well. And I remembered his name this time.
President Baker, to Board Member Gibbs. So if you look at the Operation Fix-It schedule of projects, they roughly dovetail kind of in opposite to what our 2016 Facility Master Plan recommendations were. So when you look at the spreadsheet for CAUSE, you're going to see upgrades recommended or planned in terms of making security upgrades, a fire alarm upgrade, plumbing upgrades, asphalt, and lighting. We did not include HVAC upgrades, not because we wouldn't continue to maintain the building, we just wouldn't be looking to make those comprehensive investments in the building for that kind of a category, particularly because the building is scheduled to be one of the next urgent replacements as part of the Facility Master Plan. So in terms of the work for Operation Fix-It that is underway, we have already hired the consultant for and designed that fire alarm upgrade. That is the one key upgrade in that building that we have in the works right at the moment.
Would it be possible also to talk about some of the things that the board has heard from some of the community members?
Absolutely. So let me speak to a couple things, both in terms of what you've heard tonight and what we've heard from our interactions with the staff, students, and parents there. So most recently, there was an issue where we did have some water that entered the electrical vault for that particular building. So that was the power outage that you heard about. So no safety concern.
Can I slow you down a little bit and
Sure.
fully explain what the electrical vault is? Where is it located?
Yep.
Because
Sorry.
I know everyone's not going to be
Right.
familiar with all of this.
Thank you. So our main electrical service into the building is provided by the utility, which in this case is City of Columbus Power. So there is what we call a vault. It is an underground storage, essentially, for that equipment. It is not something that we currently do. So in a new construction building, that would be placed at the ground level. So when you see a building and you see that large kind of green box, that is the main electrical service. It's the transformer for the building. So that is the equipment that is in this vault. At the CAUSE building, it is outside of the auditorium entrance to the building. And with the heavy rains we had last week, we did have water enter one of the vaults, and it did damage one of the transformers, so we did lose power to the building. City Power was very responsive. They were able to get in there, I think, within a day and make that repair. And I know some of the concern has been about the condition of those transformers, and so as a partner of the City of Columbus Power, did go ahead and replace all of the transformers. They also replaced all of the electrical service back to their own utility lines, just to make sure we wouldn't continue to have those kinds of reliability issues. In terms of, so we've heard concerns about excessive heat in the building. Obviously, without making that investment in air conditioning, there's only so much we'll be able to do, but certainly we've heard some concerns as well about temperature control during the heating season. So we have had some discussion about making sure that we are getting those reports accurately input into our work order system so that our maintenance team can continue to make those critical repairs to make sure we are able to modulate the temperature during the heating season. And then we've also heard those concerns about the restrooms. And so just to kind of make sure everybody understands. So that building, as I understand, because obviously I wasn't here in 1927 when we built the first part of it, but the building was designed and built as a combination junior high and elementary building. So there are portions of it that are certainly age appropriate, but there are portions of it that were designed as an elementary building. And that includes the core restrooms at the center of the building. So there are some upgrades there that we can make. And fortunately, that is some of the upgrades that we have contemplated as part of Operation Fix It. We just have not gotten to that stage of the work yet, but we are getting ready to start that portion of the work. And so we should be able to make, or we will be able to make an improvement on that situation in the near future. That would be the main concerns that we have heard.
And Mr. Oldham would have some additional.
And if I'm, President Baker, board members, if I may add, also, in our meeting with the parents, the staff, and students, some of the concerns came up as well was about pest control, as you heard tonight. And it didn't go in depth ears, and we're working closely with our pest control company to address that. But I think it's important also to note it's a team effort, working with the students, staff, working with the staff and administration. Because one of the things that causes, you heard, we have to look at, also we're looking at entry points, looking at making sure our door sweeps are addressed, as well as the pest control. One of the things we are utilizing is integrated pest management, which you don't use a lot of chemicals at this point. And so again, we are addressing that, but it's more of with the pest control company, also working with the administration, also looking at what doors are open, how do we control those type of things. But that's on a regular basis with our pest control. And because of the concerns that was brought forward, we're actually increasing that with our pest control company and meet with them on a regular basis. How can we resolve that on a long-term systemic approach?
Board Member Hudson?
So I would still like to find some way to include cause in this, because I think that it's a hollow promise to say it's on the building list. I mean, our last levy was only for maintenance. It was Operation Fix It, but you know, the general sentiment that came back as part of that effort was the feedback from community was, we'll support you schools, but we don't want new buildings. And, you know, we have to, I mean, that's going to be a longer term sell. And, you know, the kids are in there now, will be in the building by the time we get there, if we continue down that narrow path. You know, cause was on the list. The last time we moved facilities around, as part of the facility master plan, and we did some other things, cause was on the list and moved over to the we'll build you a building later. And this isn't just about, but I think that, you know, they were on this, the early recommendations for the facilities task force, and then again, fell off. And I think I would just ask to move this resolution forward, that we include something that directs the superintendent to identify alternatives for cause. Alternatives could be, you know, some alternative classroom settings, solutions that are, you know, education related, that are, you know, alternative learning opportunities. There could be a number of things, but I think that it sounds like there are significant needs, and it seems to me kind of, you know, I'm glad some of these immediate needs are being met, but I think there's some root cause issues that are much more about this facility that we really owe to those families to address.
So, were you offering an amendment?
Yes, sir. I
Okay.
would I would offer, resolved, the Board of Education directs that the interim superintendent study and identify, maybe study, identify.
Do we just add it to that? The sentence that we just corrected.
Let's see.
Thank you, Mr. Trevino.
Excuse me one second.
Yes, ma'am.
Is we added administrative, and then we added this, can we just add cause?
Anything else to
wasn't
offer,
in,
Mr. Superintendent?
I'm sorry.
Anything else to offer as she crafts her
Study.
amendment?
No, Mr. President, I don't have
Oh,
anything else
so we
to
could
offer
do
at this time.
this.
Board Member Gibbs?
Because I thank Board Member Hudson for offering this solution. I just want to be very clear that the Columbus Alternative High School has been waiting for a brand-new building built specifically to support the college prep curriculum and the unique academic programming that it has long deserved as the flagship high school in our district. They deserve a high school that meets their needs and the needs of students that aren't even in school yet. So I appreciate that. We moved to McGuffey as a temporary home, and we've been stuck there for 30 years. So I don't want to be stuck nowhere else in a temp site when we really want a permanent home. Kaz, family, okay. I get it. Yeah, I get it. Ditto. I get it. So,
Thank you, Board Member Gibbs.
and it's in 3B.
Okay, Board Member Hudson?
So let's try this. So let's see if I can follow my crazy notes. In that second resolution, and be it resolved, we added administrative recommendation 1, comma. We'd have recommendation 3, comma, and identify interim alternative location solutions for Columbus Alternative High School. Interim alternative locations. It doesn't take it off facilities master plan list. But it's also like working to find something now and highlight that. So it doesn't keep getting bumped off the list.
That's the intent?
Yes.
Okay.
So it would be, again, adding in as a third item in that second resolution, and identify interim alternative location solutions for Columbus Alternative High School.
So that's, okay, you've moved that we amend.
Yes, that is a motion.
Moved and
Thank you.
seconded. All right, is there discussion on the amendment that is before us, colleagues? Hearing none. Mr. Treasurer, would you call the roll on the amendment before us?
Ms. Gibbs? Yes. Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
That second amendment passed. Carried.
Thank you.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Additional questions, comments, amendments to offer? I appreciate your willingness to talk through this, and I appreciate your willingness to accept amendments. Ms. Gibbs, any other comments, questions? Okay. We have an amended main motion before us. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none. Mr. Treasurer?
Ms. Hudson?
Yes.
Ms. Reyes?
Yes.
President Baker?
Yes.
Vice President Cole?
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs?
Yes.
The main motion as amended twice, carried.
Thank you very much, Mr. Treasurer. All right. Again, I would like to thank the staff that invested so much time and resources into the process. I want to thank the task force members. Colleagues, I want to thank you for your involvement in the process. And are there any final comments, colleagues, before we move on? Board Member Reyes?
Thank you, President Baker. I think we need to reiterate again that it's important for us to concentrate on our academics. We are looking at almost being a third of the way of the year, into the year. So it's important that all this activism, we need you. We can't do it without you. The district needs you, but most importantly, our students need you. And they don't only need you in the school that you're currently in. Just an FYI, all our district needs you. So if you have a friend in a nearby school that also needs help, please ask them to help. If you have solutions for us, recommendations, please, our administrators, we are accessible. Please do that for us. It is imperative that we change the narrative for our kids. And the only way we can do it, there are studies after studies after studies that a failing school is because we have a failing community engagement. If we up our community engagement, our kids will thrive. I can guarantee you that. So we ask you, I ask you, we implore you, please continue to be engaged, bring a friend, please help us move this district forward. And thank you.
And I'll also say, those of you who were here for that particular discussion, you may feel free to depart at this time. We understand you have other things you might like to be doing. And you are more than welcome to stay as well. Thank you very much. Please continue your advocacy on behalf of our students. We appreciate it. Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Superintendent, have you anything else for the board this evening?
Mr. President, members of the board, I do not have anything else as part of the interim.
Okay, thank you very much. And colleagues, would you like to take a brief recess? Okay, we're going to recess for 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Eric, do you have the resolution?
I think.
Huh?
Yes.
I wanted to say, Superintendent, the opportunity to introduce staff.
Mr. Board President Baker and members of the Board of Education, I'd like to welcome to the Columbus City Schools family, Marvella Allen. And I should say that she's already a part of the family. This is a promotion, if I'm not mistaken, yes. And then we also have William Mitchell. Who is also already a member of the family, and that this is a promotion for him as well. And so thank you very much for accepting this opportunity and continuing the great work with Columbus City Schools.
Superintendent, tell us where they'll be. What will they be doing?
So both of them will be working with our fabulous Director Cheryl Ward with our social emotional work that Ms. Allen will be working with Ms. Ward on. And then Mr. Mitchell will be working with our school counselors and also doing that work of student support with our students and with Ms. Ward as well.
Outstanding. Thank you. Congratulations to both of you. And in your new roles, you're expected to attend every board meeting, so just put it on your calendar. Do you have any family with you, by the way? Anybody, any friends or family? Who is that? Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
And she's being very modest, his aunt. She is a former district employee who retired from the district a few years ago and provided great service to this district over the years that she was with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Superintendent?
Mr. President, no, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, then let's move on to announcements. Points of pride, colleagues, anyone have anything they'd like to share very briefly? Seeing nothing, Mr. Vice President, are you prepared to offer a motion?
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. I move the board recess into executive session per section 121.22G1 to consider the appointment, employment, or compensation of a public employee or official.
Moved and seconded. Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker.
Yes.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. The board will now recess into executive session. We may be back to these chambers after executive session if we have an item on which we need to vote. Thank you very much for being here this evening. Hello there. All right, thank you, colleagues. We are now back from executive session and back into regular session. So I would like to, if there's no objection, offer a resolution for your consideration. Whereas there is a vacancy on the Columbus City Schools Board of Education, and whereas Section 3313.11 of the Ohio Revised Code and Board Bylaw 0145 give the board the authority to appoint an individual to fill an expired term, and whereas the board has received notices of interest from individuals interested in serving the unexpired term, and whereas Board Bylaw 0145 states that the board may interview candidates to ascertain their qualifications, now therefore be it resolved that the Columbus City Schools Board of Education hereby states that it will interview the following candidates: James Ragland, Joellen Klein, Jennifer Adair. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Treasurer?
President Baker.
Yes?
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Colleagues, as there is no other business before us this evening,
I move.
there is a motion to adjourn. There's a motion before us.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Are we waiting?
Motion.
There is a motion.
Second.
There is a second.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Treasurer?
Hold on, wait a minute.
Vice President Cole.
Yes.
Ms. Gibbs.
This is an easy one.
It's very easy.
Oh, we didn't know. Yes.
Ms. Hudson.
Yes.
Ms. Reyes.
Yes.
President Baker.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn carried.
Thank you. Colleagues, we stand adjourned. Thank you for your patience and service.